Gamers, we're back today with a deep dive into the Pokemon Sword and Shield DLC. If you want the base game deets, we just had another look into that scene here. The homework helps, but isn't mandatory. Anyways, here we're diving into the weird content piece of a $30 purchase to make your Sword and Shield experience better. There may some even say fixing it. To what extent, we will see. But with Sword and Shield as our framework, we're off to a struggling start. The TLDR on that one was the game just being good on paper, but in actual execution being the very definition of the word mid, leading to the games themselves to just feeling kind of unfun, despite being good in the traditional sense. Truly, the Pokemon games of all time. But now, it's time to lock in and take in all that is Sword and Shield, but the proper post-game is sold separately. Yes, this is both a joke and not. Starting us off, we're immediately at the DLC's biggest draw. 2 whole new open zones to explore, hold forward in, and pretend to care about. Where the requirement is just booting up the game after purchasing the DLC, yes, it's given automatically. From here, your choices between the 2 lands is granted, with both ready to visit right away. The Isle of Armor is a phenomenal change of scenery, with a massive focus on being an island for those incredibly unfunny too much water jokes. A nice looking cliffs area, a more properly foresty zone, and an obligatory desert area being the highlights. The Crown Tundra, on the other hand, is a big ol' snow area, plethora of caves, and vast grasslands, just in case you forgot Game Freak's biggest strength is being creatively bankrupt. One succeeds in simplicity of its sheer size and minuscule but still existent puzzle offering. Meanwhile, the other, just chill vibes for anything if that counts. It's heavy water emphasis with what may as well be water-bound missiles, and it looks cool, I guess. Look man, it's just 2 big open areas with your typical Sword and Shield encounter pool nonsense. There's really nothing unique here that the main game's wild area doesn't already provide. Like, no way guys, we finally have real caves that you can fast travel out of and for some reason can't use the key item escape rope to flee, begging the question of why it even exists at all. Making the world feel far less stagnant though. We have at least progression, but not really, as the only ounces of unlocking more play space we get is really just tied down to whether or not you've gotten the bike or upgraded it in the main game or not, to cross water. Elsewise, it's just a door, pretty much leaving the gameplay out of battle stagnant, because as if exploring these doors wasn't cool enough, you don't get any new abilities to help traverse the world either. All you're left with is just more fast travel points, and that's as self-explanatory as it can get. Obviously super useful, extra so when wanting to jump between the 2 separate maps, but if issues exist, it's courtesy of the Crown Tundra's sheer size, just being a pitiful amount of fast travel points between both areas. But as far as big dumb empty areas to hold forward in are concerned, that's basically it. Both being steps up from the base game's wild area, but still just kind of being empty, only really providing wild encounters and items scattered about. Better this time, still very unexcitingly so. In terms of adding on to the Gen 8 battling mechanical end, we have very little to better the previous good that was offered. In terms of Dynamaxing related nonsense, we get 1 new addition, a means to allow Pokemon to Gigantamax that previously couldn't. With a new feature in the Isle of Armor, you get to gather 3 shrooms to let any of your defective Pokemon finally reach their potential of a unique attack. Urshifu is a special case where it needs an additional item for its form, and sadly Melmetal is just completely absent from getting its form through this method at all, as it's event only. This inclusion is obviously useful because if you want a Gmax Mon, you'll no longer need to scrap your pre-existing Mon or go out of your way for a Mon that can already go funny mode. The feature is even reversible just in case you see you're in Celeon and decided that Moldbreaker-esque effect wasn't worth not having manual offensive rain for. Meaning, hey look, more accessibility, which to nobody's surprise is a good thing. Now we return to reaching for new mechanical things to see, and first is new forms for the new Mons. Calyrex doesn't matter, it's just Kira mechanically, but again. But its special move doesn't overwrite anything this time. Now, Urshifu, on the other hand, has a new gimmick tied to it. So get this. We have 2 forms, but in order to make you play through the DLC a second time, or buy the game in DLC again, the catch, of course, being the fact you gotta pick between one of the 2 towers. And of course, you're never able to go up the other one, with the only benefit being the ability to evolve as many Kufus at your tower as you please from interacting with that wall decor. If you guessed, wow, it's just a complicated location-based evolution, that's 100% correct. It's a waste of time to even mention. Although like Zacian and Zamazenta, it does have the catch of hiding its form on Team Preview, just in case this obscene Mon wasn't already overkill. More in terms of the Gen 8 experiences, we have more items, like a Max Revive reskin and other junk. The one that actually matters is the ability patch. Simple item that changes the Mon's ability to its rare and desirable hidden ability, which, much like the Gmax thing from earlier, just lets you use your favorites without needing to completely replace them for something that's much better, while making these abilities just more accessible across the board. Shame getting one is a hell of a grind, and luckily for me, I had a save file ready to go for it. And congratulations, viewer, we're out of the mechanical improvements / additions. It's just one improvement and one minuscule add-on. So the game's already doing a great job on making this DLC purchase skippable. Surely the actual playthrough side of things will finally give us real content to speak on, right? Finally, we reached the meat of the video, actually playing through the DLC and its general quality. After all, it's one of the two big reasons you spent the $30 for, and it's supposed to be the saving grace to make up for the nothing burger base game Sword and Shield experience is. So, how do we fix this? Well, let's start with the Pokemon. As with base game Sword and Shield, the Earth essentially shattered when the legacy transfer only Pokemon were put down, and buried is both a feature and an inclusion, but no, it actually didn't shatter, it makes basically no difference. The Mons lineup ended up just as fine without. Here though, we basically get more Pokemon native to the DLC areas, and oh boy, you better believe we're gonna count them all here. So as a refresher, base game Sword and Shield essentially had an offering of 400 tied directly to the regional decks. Once regional variants are on the table, it's 403. Finally, 415 as a cap with the transfer only junk just for full numbers sake. So finally adding on to this count, we'll start with the Isle of Armor's lineup featuring 3 new Pokemon, 1 mythical that we could exclude, 3 new regional variants. Yes, I know Glow King's not gotten here, but it's listed here, so cry about it. 109 returning Mons of various shapes, and 21 regional variants courtesy of the Diglett quest and random traders. And if you want to count the regional variants as different, we're at 552. When the Crown Tundra's offering is brought up, we start with 5 new legendaries because power creep is healthy, 3 more with new variants, 69 returning regular Pokemon, 1 mythical obtained without an event, 58 returning legendaries mixed up of the 2 sub-legendary categories, alongside the restricted big boys at the top of the food chain, with 3 of those just being reskins. Adding that to our big dumb number, we get 687 total Pokemon across all of Sword and Shield. And that's if my math is correct. But with this count, we're considering the fact that yes, some Pokemon are the same, but also different, because they of course play different. Those are the more loose usable numbers, but for our obtainables, take away for the 13 possible event folk, and take away the 30 regional variant numbers because we're no longer inflating the counts. Keep in mind, every single one can be gotten if the base game form exists in game. Leaves us with roughly 644 unique Mons in the game to actually get, all of which are obtainable. How early that is comes down to nuances that some of which we'll have to come back to later, but this does hinge on the fact that you've completely beaten the base game of Sword and Shield. Obviously, the number is going to shrink a lot if you've not done so, but more on that in a brief minute. As first, there were no new TMs or TRs, but for good somehow. In the case of TRs, at least allowing for some copies to exist throughout the world, not being just locked to raids. But there are actually new attacks in the game, and those exist through a move tutor, which can actually be farmed through, guess what, ladies and gentlemen, doing more raids. What, did you really think it would be something else? At least these little tidbits help open up the team building side of things, but it's just a massive shame there's a distinct lack of content to use them for, especially when, again, you're doing raids. You want to do those once the game has actually been beat. You know, when you have level 100s, when you're not busy playing through the game. Which, okay, sure, the main storylines are short in this, but it's way more egregious, as for some reason, you know, any semblance of regular trainers to battle just does not exist. Yeah, in an effort to make the 2 new lands feel more dead and empty, there's just nobody to battle outside of the important characters in their rematches. Look, man, you weren't battling the optionals in Scarlet and Violet anyway, but at least they existed. At least they let the world feel less dead. There's just nothing here. Go grind more raids, bozo. We don't have content here. And that you'll see when we dive into the actual DLC's playthrough, starting now. The Isle of Armor gives us a sense of deja vu, as we have one playthrough but divided upon 2 different level curves, as the goal is to grant you 2 different opportunities to play through it, so whether you're doing it during the main game or after, you're essentially gonna be fine. But to reach our level curve shenanigans, we need to have an understanding on how the playthrough flows. But essentially, it starts with a rival battle, 1 complete nothing fest, 3 slow probes, do another battle, and then another one. But now the devs had the balls to start a battle with stage hazards that are easily removable but very welcome. Why have they never done this before or after since? From here, you do nothing of value besides drive up a new Mon's affection boost before getting a 5 battle streak, completing the first section of the Isle of Armor. After this, you get to battle a Dynamax Mon and fall asleep, I'm sure, before being dealt with the final boss, with the second act being locked off until you've completed the post-game story. So, go watch the funny animation and claim your prize of more Sword and Shield. It wasn't obvious, there's not much here at all content-wise, which is why when the level curve steps in, it doesn't really go anywhere. As mentioned, the game has 2 playthroughs designed, which means you can play through it on one of 2 level curves. The one intended needed for the main story kinda fits in decently after beating Kabu in game, but better grinding opportunities, yes, we're actually talking about grinding Sword and Shield, exist later by delaying it further. Meanwhile, the other level curve opens up once the main game has been beat, fitting pretty perfectly with whether or not you've beaten the actual post-game yet or not. The problem is with both sides is that the level progression is flawed for the same reason that the level laddering in the Elite Four of other games doesn't really work. The idea of going in late and not being properly leveled for the upcoming content despite being fine for the start, or completely steamrolling the early ones courtesy of being paced for the later battles, with any semblance of flow dead, not because of the EXP mechanics but rather the lack of content. For our main game leveling, it starts as low as 10 to 12, reasonable jump to 13s, random jump to 317s, reasonable again to an 18 average, random jump to mid-20s, then finally the bears grind to 30. The issue here is the random level jumps that make marathoning this as early as possible unreasonable. As stated earlier, making any point after that Kabu fight main game reasonable, just lacking any fraction of challenge because over leveling. Meanwhile, sooner is good joke. Complications get even more problematic when you remember that Kabu's entire tower climb is using a completely separate Pokemon, not the ones that you've been using up to this point. While on the other hand, you're stuck with the grim reality that you are battling every single trainer in the entire DLC, because of course there are no optionals. Hopping into the post-game offering, it's reasonable, as it pushes from 60 and then rolls into 70 by Kubfu, as you're dealing with post-game level 60-itis, with the trainers and wild Pokemon all up for that champion status, potentially made more trivial by the post-game plot being done. The levels flow well enough without as well. But there's a massive issue before that post-game content kicks in, and it's the bear, because for some reason, your gift encounters don't actually scale level-wise, and are 5 and 10 respectively. While the starter doesn't actually matter, Kubfu does, as it's required to progress the plot at some point for your tower run. You will need to grind in some form or fashion, hopefully with a full Crown Tundra dex on standby to cheat the levels, because your level 10 paperweight isn't just getting carried by the EXP charm to assist in leveling, because the main game wants it around level 30, and the post game, God bless your soul, wants that damn thing at 70. Calling that grind unfortunate wouldn't even begin to describe how much of a grind wall it is for absolutely no reason. Punishing the player for thinking it'd be a good idea to run the DLC's content all back to back without a break, then the game looks at you like you're an idiot for not grinding grades the entire time. Throwing us into the post game, we have 2 measly battles, and the Kubfu no longer matters. But the final battle ends at a measly, minuscule 75, which, yeah, granted the nothing for content since, at least the post game is done by this point, so the jump just ends up being semi-reasonable, but noticeable. Plus, if you went to the Crown Tundra first hypothetically, the finale fits like a glove. However, when we push in that DLC 2 experience, it's somehow much more dry and deprived of substance than the previous one was, as you begin with a battle, and then you're forced into a run of a feature, and then a choice of 3 story paths that you can play at your own pace, 2 of which is just catching legendary Pokemon, with the last of which just being 2 uncatchable battles, followed by 1 where you eventually gotta catch the damn thing and watch in horror as everything dies. Spoilers, the gameplay loop isn't fun at all, obviously because you're required to catch 8 total Mons in this manner, and the amount of tilt I felt just recording the background footage was hell, because wow guys, the Zapdos broke out of the ball for the 30th time and dying to hail again because there's not an area nearby without it. Torkoal's Sun can only delay the inevitable for so long. Regardless, you're getting just about 3 or maybe 4 battles per route, hoping the EXP yields are satisfactory. Getting back on track, completing the 3 things will drag you off to the Galarian Star Tournament for a technical just E4 round 2 type thing to finish the game off. Granted, the Isle of Armor and the same extent the post game are done, leveling through these sections are no big deal, as it's all intended as actual post game content, meaning nothing can be caught for progression until you've at minimum beaten Raihan. So our first level breaks 70, alongside the plot lines keeping pace, with the only break being around 80. Then again, this assumes that you didn't try to pull up here way earlier in the game just because it would be funny. So in terms of leveling, main game Isle of Armor doesn't work the greatest in terms of playing through it. Post game Isle of Armor is fine until Kubfu ruins everything, and the Crown Tundra just works. Unless you come into the main game and can't progress the story at all anyways. But who cares about any of that when we actually have the tools to ruin the main game? Yeah, I may have blown the load a little bit in the main game video, but for a game that goes out of its way to be unbreakable, they really dropped the ball here, as we can have Mons on par with the champ's level before even getting a single gym badge. So if the game blocks us off from catching Mons above a certain level cap, blocking the Crown Tundra normal encounters off, and raids scale down to your catchable level alongside the wild area and Isle of Armor scaling around, even ignoring Wonder Trade because of obedience issues, well, how do we do it? That has to do with Game Freak making their games too soft apparently, and presumably making a complete and utter oversight. Yes, the Rayquaza footage from last time was completely intentional, as mods in Dynamax Adventures don't have their levels scaled down when caught at all. It's a raid mode, you can catch them, and because it's not a traded mon, it will listen to you with no issues, dodging the bullet that was PLA and Scarlet and Violet obedience. But wait, Mr. Gatter, getting that mon is an assumption. There's a rule blocking everything in the way. Yeah, I'm apologizing for my failures, where I tried putting off Wonder Trade as the answer through the Peony battle. Sorry, I didn't inform you at the time that Nuzlockers were clausing this battle as an excuse to get their Dynamax Adventures encounter, as if they couldn't just delay it until late game and just beat it normally. Because Game Freak dubbed you too unskilled to win the battle, thus allowing the plot to progress anyways, because winning does not matter. This little incident lets us get obscenely overleveled mons, completely capable of steamrolling the base game without breaking a sweat, and even the Owl of Armor, just because you can get a level 65 or 70 with 0 badges just because you can. Game Freak looks at its target audience like they are fetuses, and they are correct. So yeah, gamers, that's the experience. That's it for the actual playthrough content and shenanigans. For the price of $30, you get a wide variety of extra mons catchable in-game without needing a transfer. 2 slops for playable experiences, one that's got jack squat for content, and the other whose gameplay loop is incredibly unfun despite being better. Well, at least the leveling in these areas is fine. Oh wait, no, Kubfu exists. So there goes my next few nights grinding. It's GSC all over again. Okay, while the DLC playthrough may be dry, at least they're unique with one another. But unfortunately, this is going to be an instance where the DLC is lacking a big carrying factor to make it worthwhile. But fellas, surely this is where the side content will come in to fill in the gap, right? To put it lightly, base game Sword and Shield's post-game offering is frankly pathetic for an offering post-Gen 6, really giving you 3 gameplay features that quickly stop being fun, alongside a mystery bag of far less relevant but helpful features. Now, with the DLC in tow, we can finally bring the game to par. First, let's talk about the DLC's big focal point. Yes, the one that completely breaks the game is Dynamax Adventures are in a weird state, because they found a way to make the raiding experience no longer mind-numbing, if not actually fun, and it requires some thought as well. So here's the deal. Your team of 4 takes turns picking mons to make a 4-battle gauntlet where you endure encounters with randomly selected Dynamax Pokemon that you can choose to pick up while trying to avoid 4 deaths which persist all the way through your final boss with a legendary stat ball. As you go, damage also will persist through battles, and you'll sometimes come across NPCs along the way where you can get some items from a random pool or choose whether or not to swap out mons at a trader, which is of course random. This foundation is actually pretty good. So what's the issue? First is the boss. While your boss foe could be chosen by the host, it's not exactly made aware in advance, particularly for the other players. If they're looking for something at random, you're only given a typing of the boss, whereas you can at least see what the other mons are as you go. So prep for it is hoping for luck. Oh cool, an electric type. I can't wait to grab grounds and wail on potentially Tapu Koko, Xurkitree, or Zekrom, and it's Thundurus. Thanks game, glad I can't hit him anymore. Not the most common occurrence to have your prep thrown completely out the window like that, but not being able to see who the boss is in advance sure as hell makes it a possibility. Our other real complaint is one of luck, because you're fighting Dynamax mons. You have the issue of them just usually attacking normally, or just randomly deciding to nuke one of your mons with a max move, while you sit there in horror and watch as your worthless partners die in a single hit that you could not possibly play around. But yeah, them's the issues, and usually aren't that big of a deal. The game's not too cheesable with the boss desperation removing status, stat changes, and adding more chances to attack, while thanking the Lord that awful dumb slow innings shield mechanic is completely gone. After a run, you'll be able to keep any one of the 4 mons you earned with some access to easily accessible G-Max mons. Yes, even including mons excluded from the Pokedex entirely. Meanwhile, legendaries can only be picked up a single time, and you get some useful stones alongside. Minus the disconnect punishments, it's pretty damn solid and a fun inclusion. Which is weird because Sword and Shield doesn't know what fun is. From mixing up raids we go, and remix the Champion Cup with the Galarian Star Tournament. Here it's another little 8-team tournament session, but instead of single battles, it's multi-battles with selectable partners. And for some reason, you get to use your whole team. Not just 3, meaning you're always at an advantage and should realistically never lose. The only real unique things mentioned here is the fact that these runs won't give you the champion ribbon, you unlock more partners from playing over time, and the team takes turns being able to Dynamax with one another, where the AI will only do so when they're down to their final mon. Otherwise, this feature is just the novelty of teaming up with your favorite Sword and Shield character and not much else. Good news, gamers, we have more than one battle facility now, as restricted sparring kinda is one. Here Here you gotta do a 5 battle gauntlet with monotype teams where you're only given 2 limited uses for heals between battle. The only oddity here is the fact that you're not even fighting monotype teams yourself. What is the point? These restrictions make no sense. Who the hell's remembering this exists, much less playing it? Time to never talk about this again. In terms of junk additions, that's just more. Wow, no way, the new areas have their own raid offerings and not a single soul cared. Wow. Trainer customization gets better now as a new key item will give you more options, alongside the free outfits you get for progressing the story that you can, guess what, say no to keeping on and just go back to your normal drip. The fact that I have to point this out is just so frustrating. Thank you, Scarlet and Violet. And the bike actually gets to look nice now through having 2 new styles that are greatly appreciated. Again, more customization is always good. A pretty big win for filling in the big ol' empty land is the fact we now have 2 collectathons to partake in. The worst of them is the Isle of Armor Diglett quest, as you can opt into searching a whopping total of 150 Alolan Diglett all across the Isle of Armor. Thankfully, it's condensed to just 1 land and is completely optional, which makes it feeling like the PLA Spiritomb quests, but it's just far less insulting. As you hit collection milestones, you'll actually get rewarded as well as you go. A completely unheard of idea. Spiritomb, why? Getting a handful of regional variants and Alolan starters, as otherwise mostly unobtainable additions. It's fine and it works because it's both not required for the Isle of Armor story progression and again entirely optional after the tutorial, that is. Meanwhile, the Crown Tundra hits us with another optional collectathon, being the legendary footprints. Here you gotta find 3 sets of 50 footprints scattered across the Crown Tundra, implying there's another 150 thing to find. There are more than 50 of each print, meaning you're not stuck in the hell of finding them all and then accidentally missing one. More importantly, they all hide in more specific areas, which makes finding the things a lot easier of a task to perform. Collecting all the things will let you spawn in its associated legendary, where you have to go through the hell of catching all 3 of them. Then you could take them off to a camp, then you can find Keldeo. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Not only did you already get 3 legendaries for reward, but even a mythical for a relatively easy collectathon. This is phenomenal and actually worth doing. Although what isn't worth and is completely unrelated will be the Pokemon following you mechanic. Yeah, it's the Heart Gold Soul Silver thing again, but exclusive to the DLC areas. 3 things to note. The first is the fact that you only get 1 real bonus with this, being easier friendship getting, not that hard to do post Gen 6. Secondly, the Pokemon speed is based off their Pokemon camp movement, so some of their pacing really sucks. They either move way too fast, needing to slow down from catching up to you too quickly, or being too slow and capable of catching up just to teleport to reach you. It hurts the attempted immersion that the feature really never had. And third, you can just turn this feature off by talking to a furry child. Despite the potential obstructions, it functions very poorly. At least there was an attempt, and if you're a normal person, it's probably just disabled just because of its obnoxious shortcomings. Speaking of shortcomings, gambling takes that form with the Cram-O-Matic. Essentially, it's a recycling bin to get a new item. Throw in 4, shove it down the guy's throat, flip 2 coins, knife the mystery box and spin, and dang it. The issue here is having to save every time before, so resetting is just not an option. Although as a feature, yeah, this thing loves spinning your inventory. It's so fun. A useful quality of life addition is this lady trapped on this random island, allowing you to pay ores to wipe a Pokemon's EV investment. Super useful because berry growing still isn't a thing, and because it also helps enable our collective laziness. Super cool. We're glad Scarlet and Violet took it a step further. In terms of lesser stuff, the dojo has a watt demand to add more features to it. Otherwise super forgettable, although the vitamin discounts sure as hell are welcome. Which finally leaves us with a Digging Maw and Digging Paw. One farms a bunch of ore for you, and the other hits it big on crypto watts, which at the end leaves Sword and Shield complete, as the side features help make for a far more convenient economy, item getting, and EV redistribution, improving the game's already good ease of access. Meanwhile, content-wise, we get a good and okay collectathon. Just hitting the brakes when the features kick in, 2 mid, and 1 good, really sending the DLC out on a bit of a weird vibe of being Sword and Shield but more, rather than Sword and Shield the game it was meant to be. Fellas, say it with me. Surely the story will pick up the slack, alright? Good joke. Alright, the story of the Sword and Shield DLC is a complete and utter dud as far as anything is concerned, which sucks because Sword and Shield's base game was already that. Because the stories are completely detached from that of the main game, for the most part, meaning your previous journey will not matter at all. Even more so when you consider that you can do this content during the main game, which means any narrative flow is not going to end up very well in the grand scheme of things. Starting us off, you arrive in the Isle of Armor while some person just nopes out of there, and you're for some reason tapped in to take their place. Essentially, this this version exclusive character tries to run you off from the Master Dojo, but you join instead, throwing you at the dojo competition of doing the 3 things for a reward. And wow, act shocked, you beat your new rival at the thing! And now the soon-to-be busted bear is yours. From here, you wander around and drag it up a tower for evolution, and that's it. With the post-game done, we get the extra quest where Hop drags you out to unlock Urshifu's Gigantamax form. And again, that's it. It's just running around and a reward is eventually had before you get to have your final battle with the Dojo Master. Yeah, the DLC 1 story sucks, but surely DLC 2 connects to it to add on to it or something, right? Lamau! It's another standalone story where more slop is yet to come. So, with the Crown Tundra's plot, you arrive for some father-daughter drama and battle for running off to use a feature because, of course, it's a tutorial. From here, Peony recruits you into his expedition group where you run around and catch legendaries for 3 entire storylines, from interrupting some birds with no plot to gathering the Reggies with no plot, with Regigigas being completely optional. There's nothing going on with these 2 quests, which only leaves Calyrex to even have a plot. Essentially, Calyrex has been forgotten by the people of the Crown Tundra, so you help it while it body jacks your boss to be able to speak to you in your game's chosen language because it knows all of them. Your role is in helping its legacy return, involved by you fixing a statue, growing a carrot, and reuniting it with its horse. That's all there is to the Crown Tundra. Technically, the Ultra Beasts also invade the max layer, but there's no plot. Just being an afterthought for gameplay, which leaves us with the final bit as the Galarian Star Tournament opens up. So you pull up and team up with some bozo, being the only way to wrap up the DLC plots into that of the main and win, with nothing remaining. If anything, this just shows how detrimental the idea of splitting the 2 DLCs into separate narratives is. It's the main and post-game story is hardly connecting. What isn't good. Meanwhile, the 2 plots themselves are just so short to not only feel underbaked, but of course ignoring the obvious flawed main story. But I guess that leaves us with the talk of main characters, and due to being a modern game, it's just like coin flips for who is and isn't good. Like Peony, the Isle of Armor rival, and I guess Mustard all just succeed because they're just kind of goofy. It at least gives us a few enjoyable characters during the game's short runtime. That's just it for the plot. It's nothing good, further showing how the extended double DLC plotline of Scarlet and Violet just worked so much better. And at the end, the Sword and Shield DLC finally makes the game worth it. Worth the initial $60, that is. This add-on, sadly, feels necessary in terms of making the Galar experience feel less hollow, as now you have 2 mid-stories to experience instead of 1, featuring an actual post-game, and now your supply of side content has essentially doubled. The issue, however, rolls in when it comes to the quality of said content, with our dry or unfun gameplay loop and forced grinding session when the rest of the game doesn't need it at all. Obviously being topped from being egregiously short in terms of that story content. But when it comes to genuinely good content, there's just one trying its best to stand out, and that's it. The issue at hand is, on average, we're adding mid to mid. We're not really seeing a genuinely good base game made better by good DLC. It's a base game on a goodish foundation that fumbles in the execution to the point of being so uninteresting. Whether it's the plot, the gameplay features, the main gameplay loop, anything. A game too tiresome to the point of being insulting. And the DLC had the impossible task of course correcting a complete product. As such, having these very separate feeling experiences and better content doesn't pick up the slack at all, really. It doesn't fix Sword and Shield, which is why when the DLC is added to the base game, it's still a 3-star experience. As an overall DLC to play, it's just okay at best. But in a sense to rank it, skippable. Obviously with this type of thing, just ask yourself, do you like the base game? And there you go. But if you want input from a biased source, no. My guy, it's Sword and Shield. You're already paying $60 for a game you don't like, and another $30 for that sunk cost fallacy thinking you'll finally enjoy it. Personally, I was pretty chill with the DLC before hopping back into it, and now it's just making me feel hollow. Absolutely the fault of the legendary fetching session. If anything, it helps because it guided the Scarlet and Violet DLC to a much better outcome, so at least it was a helpful stepping stone to better content. So that's it. The verdict is very skippable where we will leave things. Thank you for watching, and until next time, bear!